Welcome back to the Total Party Kitchen, a show where we make all the recipes in the Dungeons Dragons Hero Feast Cookbook. So today we're going to roll the dice, and the dice are going to tell us what recipe we're going to make. 15. Okay, so the 15th recipe is the Sembian honey glazed Roth ribs. I'm going to read the description here to find out what it is we're going to be getting into. So, whether you choose beef, pork, or Roth ribs, you can't go wrong with this delightful recipe. Multiple layers of a syrupy, honey-based glaze, the preferred varietal of honey is that of the Farunian nation Zambia, are copiously slathered on large racks of ribs, before being delicately roasted over an open flame for a careful charring. When properly prepared, these slow-cooked sweet meat falls off the bone easier than the head off an unarmed kobold. So that's pretty much it. We're going to jump right into us making them, and I will explain what it is that we did. So for this episode, we did a double batch, and there's a little bit of prep work. So here we are grating some onions. The recipe calls for 1 yellow onion, so we did 2. And then we're removing the membrane off the underside of the ribs. So this is the bone side, and you just snip in with a paring knife to kind of get the membrane started, and then it just peels right off. And then we set the oven to 325 to preheat. And now we're going to get going on the barbecue sauce. So again, we doubled up on this recipe because we had a lot of players at our gaming table that night. And the recipe calls for a half cup of ketchup, so we're using 1 full cup here. And then we're going to add the same amount of honey. Clean that out there. And now we are going to add, the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. I can't say that. I apologize. So we're going to add 2 because, like I said, we're doubling up this recipe. And then we're going to add the same amount of cider vinegar. And then the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard. And so instead of adding 4, we asked Alexa what that converts to. So we're going to add 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon. Just to make it a little easier. There we go. And then all we're going to do is grab a whisk and whisk that all together. It only takes a few seconds to combine all of that. And once it is all combined, that just gets set aside. Now we're going to jump over to the stove. Where we have a couple tablespoons of oil heated up. And we're going to add that onion that we grated. So you're going to be careful because basically the water from the onion and the hot oil will splatter, so you want to just be a little careful adding that in there. Now we're going to cook that stirring for about 4 minutes until we cook off that excess water. We're going to add a little bit of salt first. And now we're going to stir that, cooking over medium-high heat until that kind of water cooks off a little bit. And here you can see that it is cooked off quite a bit. And now we're going to add 5 cloves of garlic is what the recipe calls for. And give that a stir before we add some more spices to it. So the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of chili powder. So we're going to add 4. stir. And then it calls for a teaspoon of smoked paprika. So again, we're going to double up. And combine that before we add the last spice. And that last spice is cayenne pepper, and it calls for a pinch. We had some players that night that weren't big fans of heat, so we went a little light on the cayenne pepper. If your players are a little more adventurous and like it when things are a little hotter, you can feel free to go a little heavy on that. And then we're going to give this a quick stir, and then we're going to add in that ketchup mixture that we had from before. That gets added in there. And now we're going to stir this continuously until we bring it up to a simmer. And it takes about 4 or 5 minutes, and you definitely want to keep stirring it so it doesn't burn to the bottom of the pan. And as this cooks, it's going to thicken up, but you want it to be a little thinner than you want, because once it cools down, it will continue to thicken. So you can see here we're stirring and checking for thickness until it's about what we want it to be. And that looks pretty good. And so we're going to set that aside to cool down a little bit. And we're going to go over to our racks of ribs. The recipe calls for 4 to 5 pounds of, or 4.5 to 5 pounds of ribs. We're using pork ribs here. And we have about 8 pounds, I think it was, ballpark. And we're going to salt and pepper both sides. And then we're going to flip them back over. And the pepper first. And then we're going to flip them back over. And we're going to get a basting brush, and we're just going to coat the bottom of these with that barbecue sauce. We're not going to go too heavy. Just going to cover every bit of it. You want to spread that flavor around on every bite. Just about done there. Just make sure we get all the little spots. And again, you don't want to go too heavy. You don't want it to burn itself to the pan. And we're just going to get some tongs so we don't make a huge mess and flip them over. Go. And now we're going to coat the top side as well. We're going to go significantly heavier on the top side because you really want it to get that kind of charred, almost candy-coated crust on the top of these ribs. So you can see we're going much heavier. You don't want to use all of your barbecue sauce here because we will need a little bit more later. But you do want to use most of it. We filmed this last night, and just watching this again is already making my mouth water. Can't wait to go home and reheat some of the leftovers. There we go. We're just about done here. And then we're done here. We're going to pop these into the 325-degree oven that we already have preheated. And we're going to let them cook. They're going to take about 2 hours. You're going to want to get them up to an internal temperature of 205. I'm just going to finish up, and here they go into the oven. Like I said, it took about 2 hours. You want them to be an internal temperature of 205. You want them to be tender when you insert the knife into the meat. Kind of feel the bone itself, see if it feels like it's coming loose. And then we're going to crank up the oven to 425. And now I'm going to get that remaining sauce and really coat these, because this is going to give it that final crust that we're really looking for. I mean, it's the dead of winter now, but these would be great over a barbecue as well. And after another 8 to 10 minutes in the oven, we have some diced scallions that we use for garnish. And there we have them. There's a finished product. A couple of ribs there. And as you can see, they came out. They looked gorgeous when they were done. They were delicious. Everyone at the table loved them last night. And it was fun. It wasn't too complicated. It was pretty simple. Not the easiest recipe in the world, and it is much more time consuming, I think, from when we started to when we actually got to eat. It was about 3 hours. So it takes some time. You have to have some prep ahead of time, and it's not a last minute throw together for a last minute game. But if it's your regular game and you have the time to prep them, I definitely recommend these ribs. And as long as you don't have any vegans at your table, we have one, so that kind of fell short with her. But I would definitely guarantee that your player's going to love these. So give them a try, and join us on the next show when the dice tell us what recipe we're going to make out of the Heroes Feast Cookbook then.